So the first question is, one of the assumptions that ties together the texts that make up this book is the exercise of listening to the space and context. In your writing practice, what does it mean to listen to a place?
Yeah, that was a beautiful prompt as part of the writing process. I really appreciated that in relationship to the building itself and its initial intention, that in listening to a space, you're also listening to yourself in a sense, and this idea of autonomy that the space engendered in its initial architecture and vision, and how the interventions from the architects that were working with the pavilion that I wrote about were finding a way to both celebrate that but also broaden it. And so how listening to a place can be this very solitary existence that's almost like being in a sound chamber, where you have to be aware of your independent volition, but it also is constituted of all of the social and economic and political trappings and structures and infrastructures that allow it to exist.
Yeah, in your text, you talk about the concept of sympoiesis that Donna Haraway addresses in her book, and that works as a kind of device to understand how our relation with places or people or animals also co-creates us. So could you expand a little more on this concept, and also on your interest in addressing it in relation to the Eco Pavilion?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, in the intervention from, to be honest, I've been writing this text and not speaking with anyone about it, so I don't know if my pronunciation of the architect is correct.
Don't worry, Macías Peredo, no?
Macías Peredo. So in their intervention, they lifted the back end of the courtyard so that it elided the courtyard in the street outside. And to me, that was a form of sympoiesis. That was a way in which we saw that we have to make our worlds together. So it opened the courtyard onto the park, it opened the courtyard onto other social gatherings, and likewise, it brought that world in so that people who are outside were able to see it. So that co-constitution was something that I was already thinking about through Haraway's work, and this seemed like a very ripe opportunity to be able to take it up both in a historical transition, but also thinking about it through space, where she thinks about it through the agents or the independent vectors that make up those relationships.
Okay, thanks. You also mentioned in your text the example of Maria Teresa Alves's work with plants, and you use it to point out the need to think about temporality beyond human history, almost like a kind of natural history. So could you tell us more about her work, and also about the importance of expanding the object of study of history?
Yeah, so I had worked with her at the Vera Center for Art and Politics. She was a prize winner there during the time that I was the curator. And her work was really important to me in understanding how it's not just objects in history, but it's also these life forms that travel across history that allow us to understand our temporal relationships differently. Elaine Gahn is another artist who has a similar practice of using rice to tell time through this grain in different ways. She's worked with the anthropologist Anna Lauenhupsing, and Anna Lauenhupsing has written this book called The Mushroom at the End of the World, which has been quite well recognized recently. And I think that constellation of artists and thinkers has made it possible for us to think about not necessarily just the agency that plants might have as other actors in our world, but as also these social beings that allow us to see our relationships differently. And because they're working with a different temporality than an anthropocentric temporality, they give us a new form of perspective.
Also, I find very interesting how you bring different examples of works by different artists and in different moments, really that allow us to see that shift, no? Really that how they allow us to see further than what is visible by a first glance, and everything that it's implied in these barriers between different worlds, no? And thinking about the pavilion again, and in terms of also thinking from an institutional standpoint, no, I was thinking how when they proposed this elevated floor, you know, how important it was for us at the museum to really start thinking more about this relationship with the outside, but also how a lot of issues regarding security came up, not just the security of visitors, but of the others. Mm-hmm. And you're always talking about in the text how we co-create and how we're always with the others. And so I would like to hear, you know, your opinion in terms of how do you think this type of projects and this artists really push institutions, you know, to rethink themselves differently also, and be aware of all the structures that are really part of where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of how they do that, that's such a great question. Also thinking a lot recently about kind of during this pandemic, there's been so much time to revisit other kinds of history and other kinds of theory. So I've been looking a lot to think again about histories of structuralism and how artistic practices grew. Many artistic practices from the 70s to the present grew out of an awareness of structuralism and the theories that they introduced, and how they used that almost architectural understanding of the world to be able to create these lenses onto the structures and infrastructures of institutions. So it's it engenders a way of being able to see the institution that might not be visible without these tools that they have because of their specialized knowledge, because of the research that they've done, that allow artists to give a perspective that lends more clarity to what these relationships look like, and kind of a bird's eye view of what these infrastructures have the capacity to do. And I think there are new relationships not only that they point to, but that come out of these forms of recognition and these lenses that artists bring that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So to be a little bit more direct in answering that question, I think that the artists provide a lens that then allows a recognition and activation of infrastructures that may not otherwise be intelligible or usable, but that their visibility and their intelligibility allow for not just artists to work with them differently, but also curators and the public who are coming to see the work, how they understand what an art institution is. It really has the ability to demystify those things in the same way that it has the capacity to demystify forms of history that might otherwise kind of paper over what events have happened in the past or what the relationships are between different social, political, economic groups.
Thank you. I also like a lot the idea of producing difference, that you also address, and I was thinking maybe it could be interesting for you to talk about your project, Parmer, just in terms of unpacking where you're positioning yourself, no, from, because I find really interesting that project, because you have a very specific way of working with artists or addressing projects from that personal project.
Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by positioning myself?
By what?
Oh, when you say position, that you're
in terms of more in terms of curatorial practice, I believe. Really from because I think that informs your thinking, and your decision to choose one or other project really has to do with the ideas also behind these texts and many of these works that you mentioned here.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, that project was in many ways a leap of faith. That I knew that I had a strong investment in feminist history that celebrated difference, and that there was still a lot for me to learn from that, and that I knew that the only way I was going to be able to learn it was from others and with others, and that where I learned the most is through artistic practices. And so that was a way that I thought it would be possible to open up a discursive space that would make room for this. And simultaneously something that was kind of a struggle to walk this line between, is it a curatorial practice? Is it a gallery space? Is it an artistic practice? And what are the things that you gain with having those definitions, and like, how do you benefit by challenging them? It was really important to me that it was a project that I started in my home, and that I grew out of a form or a lineage of consciousness raising groups, which in the history of feminism in the US has been really important for women to develop their own discourse and their own like critical lens on domestic life. And social relations and how those are tied to larger infrastructural questions. And that grew to then encompass other institutions and reading and theoretical narratives that I'm now taking into a doctoral program at NYU. And so I'm going to be writing about a history of what happens in unaccredited university structures. Unaccredited learning formats. So alternative and radical pedagogy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice to hear that part. And also because at some point in your text also you touch an example where there's this performance happening in the context of a university museum, and I was thinking a lot about ourselves not being reflected there, El Eco being a university museum, and really how that puts another layer also into how really we work and see ourselves, no? And the importance always of listening the others. That wasn't really a question, but something that I kept thinking also when reading the text.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight and comment, especially as a lot of these bureaucratic structures are under different kinds of threat from defunding or how they're being directed or criticized. It's giving us a lot of motivation and space to be able to think about how the bureaucracy of a university or the bureaucracy of a museum is structured, and how in many ways you can think of it as being structured like a language, in that if you can understand the rules and the logics that are governing those infrastructures, that there is a way then to have much more agency in activating the parts of them that we might otherwise let be kind of flaccid and not as engaged and not as vibrant as they have the capacity to be.
Totally. Yes. No, because many times we think also that, I don't know, the academy is more, we have more liberty there, more freedom to some things. And then the university museum, I think, also is perceived as part of that, which I think it is. But then there's also all these power structures, no, that play, and that, as you said, we need to understand them and really be open to feel how things can be shifted a little bit here, a little bit there, and really take those risks, no, to do it. No, it's very abstract.
No, but it's true. And I think kind of going back to something that Barbara was pointing out earlier, there is also a way in which we can learn from other kinds of life forms. Like when we were talking about symbiosis, it doesn't necessarily need to be human life forms that are like human social gatherings that we're learning from. I mean, a huge part of what Caraway points to is the way that we can learn from other non-anthropocentric beings, and through the kind of the way that they manage temporality, or that they engage with temporality, and our interdependence with them.
Mm-hmm.